In this part of Let's Build a Chatbot in Microsoft Agent Framework, we're going to look still in Blazor Server and how we do streaming. And because it's Blazor Server, streaming is fairly simple. It will become much more advanced when we have a server, a backend, and a front end separately, where we will need to begin to use server-side events. But for Blazor Server, we luckily can do it fairly simple. But just so we're sure, how to make soup. I use this question a lot because it has a fairly long answer, so we can see the streaming part going on. So we send our request, and then we both get streaming back here and streaming back here, meaning one word at a time comes into view before we get this. And streaming is not only like that. We can also ask, what is the weather like in Paris and Copenhagen? Both so we see streaming, multiple tools, and stuff like that. So it will slowly come in. It made the two tool calls. It begins to reason over those tool calls, and it will stream back its result. So let's see how we did this. There we go. So let's close all these and have a look. So in our chatbot, whenever we send along, we have this small boolean if we do streaming or not. And we have seen that non-streaming is very simple. Streaming requires a little more. So if we look at it, in order to do streaming, we need to get these response updates back. And every single response is more or less one character, one word, all depending on how much that chunk came along. So we get into this hundreds, thousands times whenever we do things. And if you've seen my previous videos, it's often been that we just made a console.write here in order to get out the next text, and so on. But of course, here we need to send it back to something other, real. So in this case, we're just taking the text and just putting it into a property, a string property, and then we do invoke async in order to force the GUI to redraw itself. So this is fairly resource intensive in Blazor Server, where everything is sent between the backend part and turning it into JSON. So it's redrawing the entire page, or the delta at least, every single time. So this is rather hard for it to do, but it can do it. So what we are gonna do is, of course, the text, but we also have the tools, and not the tools. The tools will just come back on the fly, but we also have the streaming reasoning. But we also want to show, now it called this tool, now it thought about this, now it called this tool, and so on. So part of updates can actually have content as well. So one update is the tool call. One update is part of the reasoning, because the reasoning also come back with small parts of the text reasoning back again and again and again. So in order to do that, we need to do a fairly heavy for each around every single level of these, which again, there come several hundred of them. Luckily, C# is optimized, of course, but it's fairly much what we need to do. And every time we get some content back that are text reasoning, we also need to put it into a stream reasoning part. Or if it's other type of content, meaning a tool call or a tool called result, we put them into the stream content here. And again, every time we need to redraw the GUI. Later on, when we do streaming from a backend that have no front end, we of course need to begin to send some server-side events here. But more on that when we come to that. Another thing is, whenever we do streaming, we also want in our GUI to show how many tokens we have. But that is impossible to, on the fly, calculate. So we take that at the end and turn all our updates, as we do here, into a real response, similar to what we did up here. So there's a handy feature that just says to-agent response built into the agent framework that makes this easy. And then we can send the entire thing in. Because the entire response we have is actually what we want to have in our conversation history and actually show on the screen at the end. This is not what was streamed. That streaming part have been there on the screen while it happened, then turned into a real response like we would do non-streaming, and that is what we're seeing right now. So this just takes care of exactly the same here as we did up here. But during the thing, we get these two or three different things: a streamed response, a streamed reasoning, and streamed content. And for that, we have this little component where we send all these things in. And if it's streaming and we have a streamed reason, we just put out the thoughts of the streaming. So you saw it was streaming in. And if it's tool calls, we can reuse the same tool called response part here, where we just send in the stream content, but we don't have the entire conversation yet because we are only interested in what's happening. So we're not setting a conversation here and can more or less only show the tools. When we are fully done, we can go in and inspect them. And finally, if we just have the response, the text itself, it will stream in, and once it's done streaming, we essentially throw everything away again and let the real conversation takes care of showing the result. So if we go in here and say how to make soup, and let me set a breakpoint down here. And let's run it. And let me actually also set a breakpoint in here so we can see that along the way. So right now it came to the word it. Clear. I'm pressing F5 and so on. And for each of these updates, there can be content. In this case, there's a reasoning content that is a question mark. So both the object and the real text and the reasoning is streaming in at the same time if it's possible for it to do that. And again, this happens probably several thousand times as well. But once it's done and we see this GUI, these are right now controlled by the mid-level or mid-turn visuals here. So these are the ones that have values in streaming content. So we saw we got 700 streamed contents. We got our streamed response, so the full response is finished, and the streamed reason is finished. So we got all that through the system. And now, if I go back to the code, we're essentially just taking all these three and throwing them away. So in essence, right now, the chatbot, had we done a visual GUI, this would have been empty now. But then we take all the updates, all 1001 of them in this case, and turn them into the response. And then we get it like we normally do non-streaming. And that is the one we just put into the conversation. And we have a visual update. And then we are back into getting this. And now it comes from the real full response object being visualized. So essentially for a millisecond throws the things away, put in the other thing, and visualize it again using the real thing. So that is how streaming works. It's a bit cumbersome to work with, but in essence, in Blazor Server, it's actually one of the easiest ones. So streaming can be quite hard to work with, but we will manage in the future as well with other front ends. See you on the next one.